There we go. Good morning, those joining. We're just going to give it a few moments for everyone to connect to the webinar. Okay. Just give it another 30 seconds. And we'll get started. Okay, those numbers are going up. Hope everyone's having a lovely Tuesday so far. Okay. Let's get going. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the latest CRA Innovation Series webinar. My name's Anna Pashley. I'm Corporate Partnerships Manager here at the CRA, and I'll be facilitating this session. I'm thrilled to have our corporate members utility aid joining us today. We have Emily Berry and William Campbell here today. Just a bit of housekeeping before we get started. You will have had a notification when you logged on that this session is being recorded. For everyone that's signed up to join this innovation series today, you will receive in an email a link to the recording of this session that you can refer back to. We'll also have a copy of the presentation that you can refer to as well. You'll see this is a webinar format, so we cannot see or hear you. At the bottom of your screen, you will see an option that says Q&A. So we encourage people to pop their questions in there during the webinar presentation. The presentation is going to take about 20-25 minutes, and after that we've got time to answer any questions you might have arising from there. So please, as you're listening and thinking about the presentation, pop those questions in and we can work through those towards the end of the session. If you're having any tech issues, there is the chat function. You can put something in there and my lovely colleagues, Julia and Kelly, will help you out in any way they can, should you be having any tech issues today. So without further ado, I will hand over to Emily and William, who are today going through a, regarding the energy bill discount scheme, a market overview, a bit more about what the discount scheme is, billing queries and potential areas of recovery, and energy saving tips. So I will be listening intently, as I'm sure the rest of you will also. So Emily, William, it's over to you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Anna and the team. I'm just going to share my screen. Just bear with me, folks. First of all, huge thank you for having us today. Without further ado, we'll get right on to the subject at hand. So I'm joined today by my colleague, William Campbell, who is just below me waving. If you've got any questions, as Anna said, please put them in the Q&A box as we're going through, and then we can go back to them at the end. The agenda of today, Anna's just kind of run over it briefly, what we're going to be going through, but what we're really hoping you'll finish and end the session with is having a bit more knowledge about how the energy bill discount scheme will work for you, ways in which you can identify potential areas of cost recovery on your utility bills, and ways in which you can make reductions on your sites with help with the remote discovery document service. And then again, if you've got any questions at all relating to your organisation specifically, we've got half an hour, 15 minutes, whatever you need to go through your questions. So please feel free to share those with us. So we wanted to start with a poll. So I'm hoping that the lovely Kelly and Julia can help me with the poll today to get a bit of an understanding about what it is that you guys are thinking about when it comes to the energy market and your charity. So how confident are you that your organisation is going to be able to cope with rising energy costs in the next 12 months? Very confident, confident, not very confident at all, or not very confident. So if you could just pop your answers in there and we'll populate those just to get a general idea of what it is that people are thinking about at the moment when it comes to the energy market. I don't know if everyone's completed the poll. I'm not sure. Maybe everyone's a bit shy. I don't know. Okay. I'm not sure what is happening with the poll. So what I will do is just continue, and hopefully we can pick that up at the end of the session. So, oh, no, there we go. Look, see, I've just moved over and then that's what happened. So, okay, so that's good. So we've got 53% saying that they feel confident, 27% saying not very confident, 13% saying not at all confident, and then 7% saying that they're very confident. Okay, so hopefully what we can do today is get everybody to a point where they feel a little bit more confident or very confident with managing the current energy market prices. So we're going to start with a market overview. So what was it like coming into 2023? What did we see and what can we expect to see for the rest of the year? So entering into 2023, we actually saw wholesale prices take a dip, which was a pleasant surprise. However, that was in reaction to a warmer winter than what was previously expected. So we had a little bit more supply than what we needed. And also economic difficulties in China. China usually are a huge market driver on the market for us, but they were having some difficulties with COVID. And that also helped to see a depletion in the energy market prices coming into 2023. There are a couple of things to take into consideration, though. Several sources report that high energy prices will continue to be a feature in some cases for the next decade. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One of them was that Europe had allowed itself to become dependent on Russian gas. I'm sure everybody's already aware of that after what we've seen over the last couple of years. The chart at the bottom right here in the corner shows imports of gas that have come from where they've come from since the beginning of 2021. So you will see at the bottom there's a selection of red bars, and these are imports that have come from Russia. But what we can see is how they've decreased throughout the year. The blue bars are imports from Norway, which have remained fairly consistent throughout the year. What we can see is a significant increase in our reliance on liquefied natural gas, otherwise known as LNG. So it is encouraging that we have proven that we can survive entirely without Russian imports. It's also important to note that LNG flows to the highest bidder. So it's not necessarily the most reliant source for us to place all our bets on. We are going to be in competition with other countries when we're looking at global warming. People have got different temperatures throughout the year than normal. So it's not necessarily something that we can feel really confident about in terms of bringing our prices down. There are a couple of other things that we need to take into consideration when we're looking at 2023 and 2024 as well. Storage capacity is increasing. Centrica has recommissioned the North Sea Rough Storage Facility. So what that means is that we're going to see demand for gas over the summer is going to be consistent and constant because we're going to be looking to fill that up, which suggests that overall prices are likely to be more stable. So you're going to be able to get prices from providers, but they could remain relatively high. The other 2 points to take into consideration is that gas-fired electricity generation still makes up to 40% of the UK's electricity production, and it actually sets the price for the market as well. There are positives in this presentation. It's not all doom and gloom, I promise. The proportion of renewable generation continues to increase. And when the wind really picks up and it really blows, it becomes the highest single contributor. So that's always nice to know. So we need to keep pushing for renewable technologies and keep looking at ways in which we can become greener to increase that. Billy, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything kind of like macro level on this, on these last two slides.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Emily. So the things that are highlighted there by Emily are China's determination to increase growth to up to 5% by the end of the year. To do that, they're going to need a lot of energy. Hence Xi Jinping's visit to Mr. Putin, where they obviously discussed Russian fuel for the Chinese recovery. Centrica opening rough storage is good news in the way that Centrica, the American company that owned British Gas, and we saw in January a record flow of LNG from American sources into the UK. Unfortunately, that doesn't necessarily drive prices down because, as Emily pointed out, it's an open market and the LNG will go to the highest bidders. So we're all trying to bid for fuel that's out there. So yeah, on a macro level, we need to really hope that Sizewell C gets approval and gets built as quickly as possible. And we need to keep our ears and eyes open in our local areas for microgeneration nuclear plants.
Thank you, Billy. So what we're going to go on to now is the middle section of our webinar today, which, as Anna kindly pointed out at the start, is all focused around the energy discount scheme and how does it work in practice. We are continuing to go over this topic until it officially commences in April. So hopefully the information we provide you today gives you a little bit more clarity on how it works. So, Energy Bills Discount Scheme, otherwise known as EBDS. If you've worked in the energy industry or you're familiar with energy suppliers or the energy industry at all, we all love an acronym, apart from me and Billy. EBDS will commence from the 1st of April 23, and it will continue until the 31st of March 2024. The new scheme will be available to everyone on a non-domestic contract. So that does include charities, businesses, and also public sector organisations such as schools, hospitals and care homes. So that does include everybody on the call today. However, there are going to be some caveats to take into consideration with this scheme. So you have to fall into the eligibility criteria, and that includes anybody that is on an existing fixed price contract that was agreed on or after the 1st of December 21. Anyone signing new fixed price contracts, so that would be anybody signing up for a new deal this year. On a deemed out of contract or standard variable tariff, basically that just means anyone that's not fixed into a contract essentially. And on flexible purchase or similar contracts. Flexible purchase contracts, I don't believe would be applicable to people on the call today. So the main points I would focus on would be the top three. Points taken into consideration, which I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on in the next slide, is deemed or out of contract rates. If you are on deemed or out of contract or a standard variable tariff, so anything not fixed in, whilst that's your choice if you want to remain on that, a point to take into consideration is the scheme that's going to be in place from the 1st of April will have a maximum amount that the government are willing to give. If prices exceed that maximum threshold, then you will be in a position where you're paying higher prices and then not getting the support. So just something to take into consideration. If you're in a fixed contract, your prices are set at that level and you will get the support if you fit in with the eligibility criteria. But if you're not, then you run the risk of your prices going above the threshold, the maximum threshold the government will be willing to give. I'll go into that now in a little bit more detail. So eligible non-domestic consumers will now receive a per unit discount to their energy bills during the 12-month period, which is from April 23 to March 24. However, this is subject to a maximum discount, which I just started talking about on the previous slide. So we're going to go into this in a bit more depth. So the relative discount will be applied if wholesale prices are above a certain price threshold. For most non-domestic energy users in Great Britain and also in Northern Ireland, these maximum discounts have been set at the following. We are going to send you copies of these slides. We don't expect you to remember all of this, don't worry. Okay, so electricity is 19.61 per megawatt hour with a price threshold of £302 per megawatt hour, which equals in kilowatts 1.961 pence per kilowatt hour. Gas is 6.97 per megawatt hour, with a price threshold of £107 per megawatt hour, which equals 0.697 pence per kilowatt hour. And remember, on your bills, you're going to be paid in pence per kilowatt hour. You're going to be paying your bills in pence per kilowatt hour, not megawatt hours. And note that 1,000 kilowatt hours equals 1 megawatt hour. So to sum up, we know that this is quite a lot of confusing bits of information to take into consideration. So we're just going to do a little bit of a sum up on this slide. The maximum discount that can be received is 1.961 pence per kilowatt hour for electricity and 0.697 pence per kilowatt hour for gas. Suppliers will automatically reply any reductions to bills if you're eligible. We did hear about customers receiving calls saying that they had to sign up and go into a website. If you get anything like that, please disregard it. It will automatically be applied like the previous scheme. And this will be applicable to anybody who is on an existing fixed price contract that was agreed on or after the 1st of December 2021. There is another piece of support available, which is just something to take into consideration or might be applicable to anybody on this call, or you might know somebody that might benefit from this. And this is called Energy and Trade Intensive Industries, another acronym, ETII. Eligible ETII customers will have to apply for a higher level of support, and further details on how this will work will be published in due course by government. So this is strictly for large consumers of energy that might not have received support previously during the pandemic or during the energy crisis before. The important thing to note is that you have to consume a lot of energy to apply for this. The details are still being worked out, so once we get more detail on this, we will be sharing it with all our colleagues, including Anna. But there are a couple of different organisations that need to kind of keep an eye on it, and this would be people who are libraries or archive activity organisations, museums, historic organisations, botanical and zoological societies. So just in case you know anybody that you think might benefit, really important to pass that information on. But what can you do to reduce your utility costs? After reviewing the information that we went over in the last couple of slides about the scheme, I think Billy, in terms of the support given, you said that you were disappointed, haven't you, before, about the level of support that was given through the new scheme?
Extremely disappointed, considering the prices on the forward curve haven't really taken too much of a downward trend. What everybody should remember is that when you see notifications that the energy prices, wholesale prices, are coming down, that on electricity, 60% of your bill is made up of non-commodity charges. So if the prices, I believe they came down 2 points today on gas, that will have an effect for people that are buying their energy tomorrow, but it won't necessarily have an immediate effect on your existing contracts, which are already signed, or for forward contracts that you're looking to sign, because the suppliers will be buying the energy up to 4, 5, 6 years in advance for the base load. So it's not necessarily great news that the prices have come down immediately, but it means that they're monitoring the supply and demand side, which is pretty important. And Emily talked in a previous slide about renewables. Renewables, fantastic that we're trying to have a greener impact on the planet, but I would say we need a lot more storage, battery storage put in on an industrial scale to meet demand.
Thank you, Billy. That's great. Well, that nicely takes us on to what Billy was talking about there, onto what you can do to reduce your utility costs on site. So as Billy's already mentioned, we were quite disappointed with the announcement of the scheme. And for a lot of people alone, this may not be enough to meaningfully make reductions to your energy expenditure. But what we're going to start talking about now is there's several things that you can do to reduce your costs on site. So that will include things like checking your current bills for any discrepancies or any areas of estimations, reducing on-site energy usage, and looking at your areas of potential wastage as well. So billing discrepancies and estimates. So at Utility Aid, we run a service called invoice validation, and that is for all of our customers who currently work with us. And just to put it into perspective, we have recovered over 4.7 million in supplier overcharges, and that is just on bills not being correct. So it's really, really important that you check your bills on a regular basis, because there could be areas where you are paying too much and you could make potential reductions. There are two main areas that we see that are most common for customers to receive overcharges or estimations, and one of them is estimated readings. So most people probably are aware, but just in case you're not, suppliers legally only need to read your meter once every 2 years. And if you currently do not have a smart meter fitted or experiencing problems in getting one fitted, you might be being billed to estimations. So the best thing to do if you are being billed to estimations is, first of all, check your bill. If it's got a little E next to the reading, that means it's estimated. If that is you and you are being billed to estimates, please take a reading and send it to your supplier as soon as you possibly can. It's always best to take a picture if you haven't done it in a while, because the supplier will probably ask you for that anyway, so it will save you a little bit of time. But you can make reductions in your energy costs on your bills by just reviewing this specific piece on your utility invoice. The other thing to take into consideration with estimated readings on your utility invoices as well is that most of the time suppliers will overcharge you rather than undercharge you, because they don't want to be in a position where they're chasing you for a catch-up bill once you send that reading through. If anyone has been experiencing problems with smart metering or is really struggling with the process, please do put your questions in the Q&A and we can come to them at the end. There might be some useful tips that Billy and I can give you on this subject. VAT and climate change levy charges, otherwise known as CCL. We can't tell you if you qualify for a reduced rate of VAT or not, but what we can do is support you if you are being charged the incorrect rate, and then we can support you with getting that money back from the provider. It's important that you check this and then let your supplier know if you are entitled to a reduction. Usually they will provide you with a VAT declaration form to complete and return, but please be aware that most suppliers will do this process differently. Some suppliers will acknowledge your VAT declaration and backdate it right to the contract start date, which is great, but other providers will only do it for a month or a couple of months and then ask you to do the rest yourself via HMRC. So to save yourselves a lot of headache, I would recommend getting that checked sooner rather than later. Billy, do you think it's important for us to mention about de minimis on this slide as well?
But yeah, great question. I was just thinking there. So CRA and Charity Retail Association members may have a list of supplies, shops or other places that may be grouped together on a contract, in which case the supplier, because they're a trading organization, would charge automatically a 20% because they're over the de minimis usage level. And I was just thinking there that whether there was, and we're happy to research it, whether it would be more beneficial to have those shops in individual contracts, which could potentially under de minimis. So de minimis means that you're using an amount of energy below a threshold recognized by the government. But that's a potential solution for a 15% saving, but I would need to do a bit more research into that.
Thank you, Billy. If you've got any questions about VAT on your invoices or de minimis and want to learn more, then let us know in the Q&A. The other area to take into consideration with potential overcharges is metering charges. In specifics, we're looking today at meter operator agreements. I have worked with some organisations in the charity retail world that do have these kind of meters, so I wanted to make sure that this was included in today's session. But essentially, everybody who has an electricity meter will have a profile. Each profile means different things. The one that we're looking at specifically today is something called a half-hourly profile, which I will show you what that looks like in the next slide. But with a half-hourly meter, what you will have is something called a MOP. And we're not talking about a mop that you do your floor with, we're talking about a meter operator purchase agreement. And basically what that is it's an agreement between the meter operator and yourself to cover the cost of maintenance and sending consumption data to energy suppliers, essentially. However, what will happen is normally you'll sign a contract, an electricity contract, and then a meter operator agreement will be done at the same time, but there'll be separate pieces of paper, basically separate agreements. And what will happen usually is the supplier will automatically place you with their preferred provider. And then what can happen is, if it's left, is you can roll onto out of contract rates or not have the correct charges for your kind of meter. It might be based on previous legacy usage. So it might have been before you started using the space, there could have been a 24-hour supermarket that was using it. So it could be based on completely inaccurate data. What you can now do is appoint your own meter operator agreement rather than simply allowing the current energy supplier to use a preferred one. When this happens, the cost is often hidden in the supplier standing charges and can be as much as 60% more than if an organisation were to appoint their own meter operator. So it's worthwhile looking into, and you're probably thinking, that sounds great, Emily, but how do I know if I have one? Well, best thing to do is go on your utility bills. Usually on the second page, bottom left or bottom right, you'll have something called a supply number, which will look like this here. If you have a half hourly meter, which is part of what we were just talking about there, the charges on the previous slide are only applicable to half hourly meter supplies for the meter operator agreement. If you have that in place, it will begin with a 00 at the top here, and it will look like this. Worth just taking a look and seeing if that is you, because there could be potential areas of cost recovery for you to make. Billy, I don't know if you wanted to add anything on this slide, because you've had a lot of experience in working with customers when they've been in this situation previously.
Yeah, sure. So, excuse me, the highlighted 00 number there are how suppliers price your energy meter. Now, sometimes those profiles are incorrect. So I'll give you an example. Somebody takes over a shop to run a charitable business, and that shop previously ran photocopying and high intensive usage business. Well, the supplier may have priced the previous property on that consumption, and they won't change those numbers unless they're reported by the customer or a broker like ourselves. So half hourly metering may give you a cheaper price, but higher commodity and non-commodity prices. So it's good to look at the profile of your sites to see if you're on the correct profile, because that will have an impact on your pricing. And another thing I'd just like to say is that every business and commercial outlet and domestic outlet should have had smart meters fitted by 2019 under law. That obviously has got delayed because of COVID and the lockdown. So I would imagine they'll reinstigate a date, which we don't know when it is yet. I've got a feeling it might be 25, but we're trying to head to a smart grid. So as soon as you can get accurate data for your meter, how it's being used, then that's perfect.
Thank you, Billy. So please do go and check and see if this is you, and if you can make any reductions. So this takes us on to reducing your energy usage. So we get asked a lot of time, how can I look at reducing my energy usage on site? I feel like we're using too much, or I feel like my bills are being estimated. So what we wanted to do is take you through some top tips of what we usually recommend for customers to do when they're trying to look at reducing their running costs, but also becoming greener. So the first thing we always tell people to do is to first of all look at your culture in relation to becoming greener and reducing your wastage on site. If you decide to cut that energy consumption, make sure everybody within the organization using the building is on board and understands why you're doing it. Do they understand why and how much cost it has for the organization when we're doing certain activities? And maybe brainstorm ideas together, maybe look at different ways in which you can do different things throughout the day, look at your behaviors as an organization, and even look at maybe creating an energy champion, so someone to keep everyone in check and make sure everyone's carrying out the commitments you've all agreed. and keep communicating about the differences you are making financially and environmentally, just to keep everybody in good spirits about what you're trying to achieve. Billy's already mentioned how important it is to have actual data. You can't do anything unless you have the actual data, as Billy's correctly said. So it's really important, if you haven't already, put an AMR on your wish list. An AMR stands for automated meter reading, and its device lets you review your consumption in both operational and non-operational times. And it's really, really important because this gives you ability to understand business patterns and make sure that you're making better decisions on when you can reduce that consumption, why it would be more beneficial, but also identify anomalies as well. So you might not know that something's consuming large amounts at a certain time, and you will only know that if you can see how much you're consuming. Pick your energy firm wisely. So check you're getting value for money. And if your tariff does have dual rates, and this is pertinent to reviewing your usage, you might then look at your business patterns and see that it may be prudent to carry out certain tasks during off-peak times where maybe you're paying less for your energy provision. Be aware of the ghost of energy past. What we mean by that, it's not a drawback to Christmas, I promise. This is talking about phantom energy. And that's something that's used by equipment that's plugged in, but it's not actually in use. Usually I talk about if you're at home and you've got a TV plugged in, maybe your kid's got a switch or something like that, and they put all the controllers in the console, and it's just sat there on standby. That's the kind of stuff we're talking about. It's a big contributor to your consumption. So try having any computer peripherals, printers, monitors, anything that consumes electricity like that connected to power strips. So it can be really, really easy for whoever's using the building just to flip off all the switches and cut all the power in one go. And the final point is controlling temperature. So heating, ventilation, and air conditioning can account for 60% of energy costs. So when you're working in your premises in your building, think about setting the temperature controls, which only operate below 23 centigrade. A 1% thermostat adjustment can reduce energy costs by up to 8%. So
Emily, can I come in on that one? So
yeah, of course.
The government announced, Mr. Hunt announced in his budget that there was £100 million available for the charity and not-for-profit sector to help the more vulnerable people in society, which is brilliant. £40 million of that is apparently, and the devil's in the detail, everybody, is apparently going to go towards energy reduction support. So if you add those two things together, I guess, and this, I'm just trying this out there, and it's my personal opinion, but if you look at warm hubs, and you could have people coming into your shop to keep warm, especially the older in our society, it may attract new shoppers to your venue, or new customers or service users, but there may be funding available because of that kind of support. So that's my own personal idea, my own personal view, but I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you, Billy, and a really good point to share as well. So if anyone's got anything they'd like to add to that, put it in the chat or the Q&A, and we can discuss at the end. So a final run through of our energy saving tips. So only heat areas that are being used. Sounds obvious, but we go to organisations all the time where it's red hot and all the windows and doors are open. So just think about how you're using the building and try and get everybody thinking about it in the same way as you. Check your thermostats regularly, so make sure nobody's being cheeky and upping that thermostat to the temperatures that you all pre-agreed when you were creating a culture. Check for drafts and stop them if you can. There are lots of easy ways and cost-effective ways to stop drafts. You don't have to use crazy equipment that costs a lot of money. Billy talks about using a feather to identify where drafts are, so be a little bit more creative with how you're doing things. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money. Monitor your energy usage. So remember, you can't do anything to reduce your cost or identify anomalies unless you have that usage. So please, please, please take meter readings and keep a record, and request for a smart meter to be fitted or an AMR meter to be fitted. As Billy said, the grid does need to be smart, and there was a deadline for that for 2025. We'll see if we'll get there, but it's really important to put that on your list. And deal with your base load, so switching off non-essential equipment off at the end of every day. I cannot tell you how many people in this office who aren't currently here like to leave their computers on at the end of the day, and I'll just go around and switch them all off, usually because I've got them all linked to one power switch. So just something to take into consideration. The last thing we wanted to talk about before we go on to our Q&A portion of our session today was something to do with reducing your energy costs. So we've done a lot of work with our charitable partner ACRE, who focus on providing support to organisations that are in rural settings, usually village halls and community buildings, so provide a lot for the communities. We've been looking specifically with them at what barriers they were facing, these spaces were facing when trying to start that journey to achieve net zero and make these energy reduction actions. So we did a survey with them last year, and we surveyed 557 halls on a sample to see what their thoughts were. And actually all of the halls on the 557 sample said they did want to make reductions to their energy usage and start that journey. However, the huge barrier was the cost. People didn't have £1,000 just lying about that they could then get an energy assessor to come out on site and assess the building and the fabric. So in response to our findings, what we have launched is a remote discovery document service. And basically what this is specifically aimed at organisations who run smaller spaces. So that does include things like charity shops, okay? So using your mobile phone, you'll be connected to a qualified energy assessor who will tour the building with you virtually via video link and assess all the areas of the building's usage, the fabric of the building, areas of concern, and give you kind of like an education piece as you're walking around the building together. Following on from the remote survey, you'll then receive a full report, including a follow-up consultation and recommendations on things like metering upgrades, additional monitoring, energy monitoring packages, and then you'll then start to work to an annual energy report and then have an introduction into how you can put those things into practice. These costs for halls and centres and also for charity shops can start at just £150 and can make a huge difference. You can actually use the data at the end of it to apply for funding to get some of these renewable projects and technologies that we've heard so much about. And that, without further ado, is the end of our presentation today. So I think, Anna, we're ready to see if anybody's asked any questions for us.
Yes, thank you for that. I was just reflecting a couple of months ago when I was just having a check-in with Emily. She was saying, and of course, Anna, you know that if you leave your charger plugged in without even plugging in your phone, that will still use energy. And I said, yes, of course I knew that. I have been making sure that I unplug it. And there's just so many little practical tips there that are just really worthwhile reminding us all of, because it's so easy, isn't it, to forget just to unplug and turn off at the end of the day.
Yeah.
We have had some questions in the chat. So going back to the start of the presentation around the energy discount scheme, someone's just asked for clarification to say, if they'd signed a contract on the 1st of January 2022, does that mean they wouldn't qualify for the energy discount scheme?
No, that means they would. Sorry, Emily, how rude of me.
No, you go, Billy.
They would be eligible for the energy discount scheme and the previous relief scheme. So they should have already been seeing discounts applied if they were eligible by their supplier on their bill on a separate line.
Okay, so that's when it's worth in those bills, isn't it? And the next question is a question saying, we have smart meters in all our shops installed by British Gas, but when we move to positive energy, it doesn't appear that they're reading all the meters. So right. Is there any get around that or anything they need to be doing to make that happen?
So to give you, I'll take that one, Emily, if that's okay. So let's go back to when there was a desire from central government to get smart meter rolled out. E.ON and British Gas decided they were going to fit their own smart meters, which, when you leave suppliers, can't be read by any other supplier. So it was an old generation. The new generation of smart meters are called SMET2. That's S-M-E-T and the number 2, SMET2. Those new generation meters, which have been around for about 3 years, can be read by other suppliers. So I wouldn't imagine Positive Energy would have the ability to roll out smart, but I would ask them to have a look at installing smart meters where you can get accurate energy, and make sure that if they do put them in, they're SMET 2. Okay. And then we won't have that problem again.
So even if you were to change contracts again, it would just be applicable across any energy provider. Correct.
Another point to that is that the energy industry has made smart data more fluid, so it can be read by lots more organizations, which is a positive thing, because what we're trying to do is balance the supply and demand areas of energy generation. That will help us try and hit our green agenda, but it will also help on pricing.
Okay, so I guess an action for people on the call today is to check that they've got a SMET 2 meter in their shops. And if they don't, it might not be actually picking up the data that would be necessarily the most helpful.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. So going through my notes, when we talked about this, sounded like a sort of Harry Potter charm or something. The de minimis.
De minimis.
It does sound like Harry Potter.
That's how I remember it. But that was really interesting, and it's not something I've come across before. There was a question around that threshold amount. Yeah. What is that threshold? What should people be looking for when they're looking into this? Could you talk us through it a bit more?
The threshold for, firstly, I'd like to put a caveat on. This came to me today. Okay, right. While I'm sat there, I often have these funny spurts and things go on in my head, and I guarantee I won't be sleeping tonight because I'll be on looking for information on this. So the thresholds are, for electricity, it's 1,000 kilowatts a month. And for gas, it's 4,397 kilowatts a month, 4,397. So anything above that, 1,001 on electricity, wouldn't be de minimis. Anything that and under would be de minimis.
And when you were talking about how potentially a number of outlets might have a blanket contract across them.
Yes.
So would it be that actually, if you were looking at doing separate contracts, potentially you'd fall below that level?
I would say that's very, very possible.
And overall, that would mean that actually your costs would be potentially reduced?
Yes, I would say so. So if you had 50 shops and you group the 50 shops together, you know you're probably going to get nowhere near those numbers, the de minimis numbers. But if you suppose it's going to be a headache in terms of managing them, but that's where you do someone like a broker. But if you sign individual contracts for those, they should really be seen as individual. You know, the suppliers can't tell you A, what VAT you're paying, and B, what where you should put your contracts and why you're doing that. So from their point of view, because potentially all the shops would be under one group heading name, but they'd all be run individually, say under franchise, for instance. So yeah, that's it would need a little bit more investigation, and I'm happy to support people if they think that would be beneficial. Sorry, we'd be happy to support. Emily, you've got to tell me off when we finish this.
No, I was just going to say, to add to what Billy's been saying about de minimis as well, because it is a really complicated area for people to kind of grapple with. But this is why it's so important to make sure your readings are correct as well, because let's say you can't qualify for whatever reason for a reduced rate of VAT because of your trading. I know that there are quite a lot of charity shops that don't qualify for a reduced rate of VAT in that respect. But if you're not submitting regular readings and the supplier is estimating, they could be estimating that you're using above the threshold, and then you're being charged extra VAT when you don't need to, which is why it's so important to get a hold of that usage and make sure that you are sending it to the provider regularly. If you have
And it's very, very bespoke for each individual organisation, because we're saying charity shops and things. I'm sure the CRA have a bigger action from groups within the organisation. So we would look at each individual case separately and try to come up with ideas how we could support them.
Lovely, thank you. Next question, directed at you, William, but I'm sure anyone can answer. With the half-hourly meter reading bills, when we're looking at our utility bills, can we identify where there is coding or anything like that that tells us that we've got that in place?
Yes. So if I just run through the non-half hourly stuff first, if you have an 01, so the profile are the first two numbers on your electricity bill. Okay, that's the code. So the code would be 01 is a domestic meter, which basically we would all have in our houses. 02 is a dual rate domestic meter, which means you have a day and night rate. 03 is a single rate domestic meter, but uses a bit more. So it could be a 5-bedroom house, or it could be something else. And an 04 is similar, but a dual rate. Everything else would be 00. So the 00 means you are half hourly and you must have a meter fitted that can relay data back to the supplier and the network.
And so if you're looking at your energy bill of your retail space and you don't have that 00, is that when you contact your supplier?
Not necessarily, because it's all based on consumption. So it's a calculation based on consumption, and on gas, it can depend on where you are in the country, because it takes more energy to push gas uphill. Let's put it that way. So it will depend on your consumption, and I wouldn't advise the supplier necessarily until the calculations have been looked at, because it might not be beneficial for you to do so, and there is no legal requirement to do so. I would say on the flip side, if you've got a half hourly, then I would look at it differently and say, right, it might be worthwhile looking to reduce the non-commodity charges, depending on the size of your building and your consumption.
And I know this kind of work is something that you're doing with a number of our charity members at the moment. So I'm sure there's plethora of examples there of, everyone's individual circumstances, how you're able to flex and recommend the best thing for them.
Yeah,
right?
Normally we can see by the kind of size of the building whether what it should be doing. So if you have a country mansion that was originally lived in by a wealthy family, and then they disappear and it's bequeathed to a disabled group or a care home, then obviously the operational work in that building is going to increase by 500+%. So then the profile is going to be wrong. And then you get deeper into getting actual reads, getting accurate information, decide what's the beneficial to the customer, and then you would take the supplier on and have it changed.
So a more practical question here. So one of our webinar participants is currently renewing some individual shop electricity and gas contracts. Can you give any sort of recommendation on whether it should be a 1, 2 or 3 year fix? Or again, is that something where you need to really scratch the surface to be able to make a recommendation at this point?
You want to take the first part, Ems?
Yeah, so I was just going to say, usually what I recommend doing is, instead of trying to focus on duration, think about your organization's appetite for risk instead. Makes the whole process a little bit easier. So when we say appetite for risk, we mean, are your budgets really tight and really fixed? If they are, for example, let's say you've got really stringent budgets, then you'd be more inclined to go for a fully fixed contract for a longer duration of time. However, if you've got a bit of flexibility in there, perhaps you've got a bit of room to be a little bit more risky, then you might want to do a shorter term duration where you can see how the market unfolds in the next 12 months. The main things to take into consideration with shopping around is, please check your terms and conditions. Usually this is when good brokerages come in handy, but it's really important to check the T's and C's of your contract. Couple of things to take into consideration. If you're going to make any changes to your buildings, if you're planning to see any reductions in your energy usage across the duration of the contract needs to have included in it flexibility for you to do that. Some people have something called take or pay, which then penalizes the customer for consuming more or less than a certain amount stipulated on the contract itself. So really important to take that into consideration. And the other thing to look at as well is the contracts that you're being offered, are they based on accurate data? Are they all based on the same accurate data? So they're all using the same usage figures. And I guess the final point from me as well is just checking to see if it's the right contract for you. If you want something that's watertight and fixed for a longer duration of time, then I would suggest looking at something where you know the commodity that Billy was talking about earlier, the commodity and non-commodity costs are fixed for the duration of time. Not all suppliers will do that. And it's really important to check that, because we did see a lot of customers get caught out by this when we saw suppliers going under, during the pandemic, where we saw quite a few go under. That's when we saw these charges start to come into play, and suppliers look at how they can redistribute charges to customers. So those have been my key takeaways. Sorry, Billy, I'll pass over to you.
That's right. So Emily's right. The suppliers that went under were basically domestic suppliers. And what they were doing, they weren't hedging their trades. So when I say hedging, they weren't buying out forward the base loads on the markets, like I mentioned before, 4 to 5 years in advance. So if you look at the forward curve, a 1 year would be better, a 1 or a 3 year as we sit today would be better than a 2 year, because the forward curve 2 year prices are higher. And if you bought the 3 year, they'd be aggregated with 2 lower prices. But if you bought the 12-month, they'd be aggregated just on those 12-month prices. But to do a 2 year, you'd have the aggregation of the high 2 year and the slightly lower 1 year, which would basically be higher. So what my advice would probably be is to do your due diligence on suppliers. Somebody mentioned Positive Energy before. I know this is being recorded and hopefully Positive Energy will see it, but they do have a contract where they increased or they changed the contracted rates, because in their contract it said they were allowed to do so, and that's for the consumption. So yeah, that's a bit difficult, but yeah, have a look at the suppliers, ask for a 1, 2 and 3 year price, and then, as Emily says, work that out against what your budgets look like over those next periods.
Thank you. We've got a couple of more questions to get through. I just want to let the participants know, if we don't have time to answer them all, we'll pass the questions to William and Emily, and they'll be able to answer them and include them in the email with the link that will get sent round after this. So if your question doesn't get asked, don't worry, there is a second opportunity to get that answer. We've got one here that says, we've had some issues with some of the companies who fit the smart meters. So they need a date to be able to access a property across their portfolio to fit the meter, but they have a number of properties and the smart meter provider will not specify which one it is they want to go to at a particular time. Is this something you have come across before, and is there a way around it?
Well, we would manage so that there has to be a program based on, I would submit to the AMR provider or the fitting engineers a list of the postcodes and addresses and say, right, we need a program for this because there's only me and I've got to get around all these. That's what we would do to address it. The issue that there potentially is, if you miss an appointment, it could be 60 to 80 pounds that they'll charge you for not being there.
I guess that's the issue, because if you don't know which one they're going to pick, how do you know to have someone on site?
Not your fault, I would say. Not the customer's fault, Anna. If they're not going to give you the proper address that they're turning up to, then I think, you know, that they're not behaving properly. If it's done via a supplier, I would let the supplier know that that's going on.
Okay, thank you. So put it back on them and have them provide a schedule of intent for where they're going to go. Thanks. So a question here, we had solar panels installed in 2019, and because we do not have a smart meter, we're not getting any reduction on electric consumption. We've been chasing to get the SMET2 installed. Is there anything that they can do to expedite the situation?
Okay, so the first question has to be, when the solar panels were fitted, what were they fitted for? Were they fitted to provide energy to the building? In which case you would need an inverter, which would ensure that that energy is being used by the building. If some of that energy was to be used to export, then there has to be a separate export meter, and a SEG would be signed with somebody who's going to buy that energy. So it's kind of a more complex issue. The good news is that you can backdate payments, but you have to, if you want to take pictures and send them through to Emily and I of the metering you've got, we can pass it over to one of our team who can help you.
Fantastic, thank you. So I've just got one last one that we'll just try and cover. There were concerns about the accuracy of smart meters. With that SMET2 now in, is that still a valid concern, or do we think now the tech is there that we are getting accurate results from those meters?
I think that the technology's moved on. I can tell you that the Natural History Museum in London actually had a half hourly meter for a long time. This was 8-9 years ago, and they were getting estimated reads. So I understand that there could be inaccuracy. What I would say is, remember that the smart AMR meters run off a mobile signal. And if a mobile signal fails, then the smart meter will fail. But I would say that, and this, please don't quote me on this figure, but I'd say at least 90% of AMR reads are accurate.
Fantastic. I'm going to just see if I can split one more question in. So one of our participants, they've just checked, and one of their shops has the 00 on the MPAN number. They'll be soon changing contract for this location. Do we need to get this changed before or when we negotiate with a new supplier?
Oh, wow. Great question. Right, Ems, you go first.
You can answer it in 1 minute.
I have 1 minute. Okay. I would not wait. I would ask us or somebody else to have a look at that. It will depend. If you've got a large 1,000-meter space, then, and you're using a lot of energy, then that's the first thing I'd look at. Why are you half hourly? What sort of energy are you using? Are you using over 50,000 kilowatts a year? That's what I would do first. I wouldn't sign a new contract with a half hourly, because you may get a good pence per kilowatt hour price or a better pence per kilowatt hour price, but you'd pay higher non-commodity charges, which will probably outweigh that. So I'd look at that first. Sorry, Emily.
Well, what a brilliant Q&A. Look at that. Answered. I did just want to point out your mention about warm spaces. We did a couple of months ago put something in one of our newsletters with some guidance to shops on how they can set up a warm space provided by the Library and Information Association, CILIP. So we do have that as a resource on our website. So perhaps we can add that link in again when we're sending information around, because it's a good call. So thank you everyone today for coming along. As we said, we'll be sharing the link, we'll be sharing Emily and William's contact details and any of the supporting information. In the meantime, if you've got any further burning questions, you can send them to me. I think Emily popped her email in the chat, but otherwise, thank you so much for your time this morning. And we'll, I'm sure, all be in touch soon to talk more about this fascinating topic.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
All the best. Bye.
Bye.